After the flames of Persepolis died, and the blackened columns stood like ghosts against the rising sun, Alexander knew one truth with absolute clarity. His conquest was not complete, not as long as Darius III still lived. The Persian king was not merely a rival monarch, he was the symbol of a world Alexander intended to reshape. Somewhere in the burning shadow of his ruined capital, the last great king of Persia was fleeing east, surrounded by a shrinking circle of loyalists, and hope rapidly fading. For Alexander, this was not a war of borders anymore, it had become a hunt. Word reached him that Darius had escaped Persepolis just hours before Alexander's arrival, carried away in a battered royal carriage, guarded by tired soldiers who no longer believed victory was possible. Persia's once mighty empire had been reduced to a handful of loyal satraps and a desperate king clutching the remnants of dignity. Alexander wasted no time. The moment the triumphal celebrations in Persepolis ended, he gathered his fastest troops, the companion cavalry, the Achaemenids, and the unwavering Hypaspists, and began the chase. The road east was long and punishing. It cut through high mountains, narrow passes, scorching plains, and villages abandoned by those who had fled the chaos. At every step, Alexander encountered signs of Darius's passing: broken chariots, torn satrap banners, burnt supplies, and, tragically, bodies of Persian soldiers who had collapsed from exhaustion. Alexander studied every clue with the eye of a hunter. Darius was injured, moving slowly, and losing support by the day. The hunt was tightening. Along the way, Alexander received unsettling news. Many Persian nobles, men who once swore loyalty to Darius, had begun deserting him. Their speeches of loyalty faded when faced with the growing power of the Macedonian king. Some openly declared that Persia needed a new ruler. Others plotted in secret, knowing that if Darius was captured alive by Alexander, their own futures would be uncertain. Among these satraps was Bessus, the satrap of Bactria, a cold and ambitious noble who believed he was destined to rule. He watched Darius weaken with each passing day and decided that Persia needed a new king himself. Alexander marched faster than any army had marched before. Day and night, the thunder of Macedonian hooves shook the desert roads. They knew that capturing Darius would end the war that had consumed their lives and taken them thousands of miles from home. Many soldiers wondered why Alexander wanted Darius alive. Was it political strategy? Was it the desire to show mercy to a fallen enemy? Or was it simply that Alexander wanted to defeat Persia's king with his own hands, to see him kneel before him? No one knew for certain, but every man understood one thing: Alexander would not rest until Darius was found. As the Macedonians approached Media, terrified messengers arrived from villages ahead. They told stories of Persian soldiers fighting among themselves, of Darius being treated as a prisoner by his own satraps, and of Bessus's growing power. Alexander's eyes hardened when he heard this. Darius, despite being an enemy, was still a king. And what Bessus planned was not the act of a warrior, but of a traitor. Alexander wanted to defeat Darius, not witness him humiliated by his own men. The pursuit stretched into weeks. The mountains around Ecbatana rose like stone giants, and Alexander pushed his men up steep paths that even goats struggled to climb. Still, Alexander rode ahead of them all, refusing to slow. He would often scout alone with a handful of cavalry, his cape snapping behind him like a banner of war. Every night he sat by the fire, studying captured scouts and local guides, interrogating them for the smallest hint of Darius's direction. Finally, after crossing Ecbatana, Alexander learned that Darius had been seized by Bessus and a group of conspirators. They had chained the king, placed him in a rough wagon, and were dragging him deeper into the east toward Bactria. They intended to proclaim Bessus as the new king Artaxerxes V, claiming that Darius had failed Persia. To Alexander, this was an unforgivable insult. It wasn't enough that Darius had lost his empire, Now he was being robbed of his dignity as well. The hunt became personal. Alexander began the most grueling chase of his life. His army marched more than 50 miles a day, pushing beyond human limits. Horses collapsed, yet no one dared stop. They could feel history tightening around them, the end of Persia, the rise of a new world leader, the moment when an empire older than time would finally fall. Through barren plains and burning deserts the Macedonians raced. Every hour mattered. Darius's captors were cruel men, and Alexander feared what they might do when they realized the Macedonians were close. He rode at the head of the cavalry, his eyes fixed on the horizon, every muscle permanent with tension. Then one afternoon, a scout returned with breathless urgency. They had found the Persian camp. Not far ahead, in a remote valley, the conspirators had stopped. Alexander spurred his horse forward. As the Macedonians approached, they saw dust rising into the sky and men shouting. Bessus and the traitors had realized the inevitable. They could not outrun Alexander, so they made a coward's choice. They stabbed Darius and fled with their remaining troops, choosing treachery over honor. The Macedonians broke into a gallop, thundering into the camp as the sun bled red across the sky. There, lying in a broken wagon, was the last king of kings, Darius III, wounded and chained, his royal robes torn, struggled to breathe. A Persian soldier who remained loyal to him held him upright, speaking softly in their ancient tongue. Alexander pushed through the crowd and approached the dying king with rare silence. Darius looked up, and though his vision was fading, he recognized the man who had shattered his empire. But there was no hatred in his eyes, only exhaustion and acceptance. The Persian soldier supporting him whispered that Darius wanted to speak. Alexander knelt beside him so their faces were level. With the last of his strength, Darius thanked Alexander for his honorable pursuit and cursed the treachery of his own satraps. He asked for mercy for his family and requested that Alexander avenge him against Bessus. Then, as the desert wind whispered across the camp, Darius's breathing faded. His head slumped forward, and the last king of the Achaemenid Empire died in the presence of the man who would replace him. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Even his soldiers were silent. The death of Darius marked the end of a world that had existed since Cyrus the Great. Alexander bowed his head in respect, then took his cloak and covered Darius's body, declaring that he would be buried with royal honor, as a king deserved. He swore before his army that Bessus would be hunted, captured, and punished for his betrayal. The war that had taken them across deserts, mountains, and rivers had ended not with a battle, but with the quiet death of a defeated king. But for Alexander, victory was not celebration. It was responsibility. Persia was now his, not by conquest alone, but by inheritance. Alexander ordered the army to prepare a royal funeral procession. Darius's body was sent to Persia for burial in the tombs of his ancestors. The Macedonians marched alongside in solemn silence. The pursuit transformed Alexander. Something within him shifted. He no longer saw himself as a mere conqueror or avenger of Greece. Standing over Darius's body, he felt the mantle of the Persian kings pass to him. He was now the ruler of 2 worlds east and west, and he believed destiny had chosen him to unite them. But a promise remained. Bessus and Alexander would keep that promise. The hunter who chased Darius would soon become the hunter of the traitor who betrayed him. The conquest of Persia was complete, but the story of vengeance, ambition, and empire was far from over.